Her name was Lola, and she was a showgirl. And when I found her in the 1900 census, I knew I had to find out more about her. The more I dug, the more I realized that her identity was based on lies. But first, to my fellow Gen Xers, I'm sorry about the song you now have stuck in your head, but I promise it's worth it. Lola Milton was listed in the 1900 census in a boarding house in Hot Springs, Arkansas, along with Gus, Josie, and Frank Milton, all of whom were listed as show people. The 1900 census just lists relationships to the head of household, and since in this case the head of household was the owner of the boarding house, all of the Miltons were listed just as boarders. But based on their ages and their birthplaces, my working theory was that Gus and Josie were the parents, and Frank and Lola were their children. Vital records in Arkansas didn't turn up anything, and I couldn't find the family in 1910. Frank and Lola were probably married by that point and living apart from their parents, but what about Gus and Josie? They all disappeared from the records like they never existed, and that's when the big question hit me. Were these even their real names? If these were just made-up stage names, they could be anywhere, or anyone. I had no other leads, just those names. So I went where performers leave a trail: newspapers. Lola was the standout in their act, and newspapers loved to talk about her. Eventually, the act was even renamed the Lola Milton Trio, and they performed all over the eastern half of the United States. By 1912, Bert Pfeiffer had started appearing in their shows. But Gus Milton? He disappeared from the articles entirely. Here's Lola, Bert, and Josephine in 1914 in an article about their appearance in Duluth, Minnesota. My newspaper research struck gold with an article in the Fort Smith, Arkansas News Record in May 1900, so just about the same time as the 1900 census. The Miltons talk of their tour just closing. And in this article, they're described as Mr. and Mrs. Milton with their 2 children. They were in Fort Smith and Hot Springs for the summer, having just finished a tour of Mexico. They planned on going to their old home in New York in the fall. Mrs. Milton, Josephine, claimed that Gus was the only man she had ever been with, and that both Frank and Lola were practically born on the stage and had been performing since age 4. Josephine also said she had both of her children before the age of 17. The 1900 census disagrees with that. As I read this article, I realized that Lola's story was sounding less like Copacabana and more like the musical Gypsy. So I had names: Gus, Josephine, Frank, Lola, and now Bert Pfeiffer. But no confirmed origin, no birth or marriage records, just stages and tours and stories. Then came the breakthrough. As I was searching through newspapers with a combination of the different names that I had, I found it. Lola's obituary in the Chicago Tribune in 1918. Mrs. Lola Pfeiffer, née Milton, October 21st, 1918. Beloved wife of Herbert, fond mother of Fanchon, daughter of Josephine and the late Gus Milton, and sister of Frank Milton. That obituary was just a couple of lines in the newspaper. But when I read it, things started clicking into place. With a date, a place, and a new name, I had a way in to find Lola's story. So Lola married Bert Pfeiffer, who had been in the troupe. I have to admit I was a little sad that Lola hadn't married a man named Tony, but that's because I still had Copacabana stuck in my head when I found this record. Since the obituary gave such good details, I could look for Lola's death certificate. And that's where things got messy. Lola Milton Pfeiffer, born in Iowa on February 16, 1882, the daughter of Frank Cotting, born in Luxembourg, and Josephine Holmes, born in New York. Wait, Lola's father was Frank Cotting, and he was born in Luxembourg? What about Gus Milton? Everything I thought I knew about Lola's father just went out the window. The informant on the death certificate was Herbert Pfeiffer. So you'd think he would know information about Lola's parents, considering that he'd been working with them for several years. All of this seems odd, and I don't want to just write it off as, oh, they used a different surname in their act. Plus, Luxembourg seems really specific. So who is Frank Cotting? I had to find out. The 1885 Iowa State Census shows Frank Cotting with presumed wife Fanny, born in New York, with children Frank and Lola, both born in Buena Vista County, Iowa. Now check out the elder Frank's place of birth, Luxembourg. The ages of Fanny, Frank, and Lola were consistent with the 1900 census. This is all too much to just be a coincidence. Are Frank and Fanny Cotting the people who we know as Gus and Josephine Milton? Time to dig a little deeper. Frank Cotting and Fanny Holmes married in Buena Vista County, Iowa in 1878. And remember, Holmes was listed as Lola's mother's maiden name on the death record. Frank and Fanny's daughter, Annie Viola, was baptized at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Buena Vista County with a birth date of February 16, 1881. That's exactly 1 year off from Lola's death certificate. And it isn't uncommon when someone fudges their age later in life to keep the same month and date and just change the year. I feel confident that Annie Viola became known as Lola. I also found Lola and Bert's marriage in Indiana in 1911, and she was married as Lola Cotting. I'm feeling good that these are the right people. Now, remember Josephine's story about how she had both children before the age of 17 and that Gus Milton was the only man she had ever been with? Well, here's where her story completely falls apart. Fanny Cotting married Charles M. White in Mills County, Iowa in 1890. It was the second marriage for both. Her maiden name was Holmes and her birthplace was Plattsburgh, New York. This fits what we know about Josephine. So who the heck is Charles M. White? Well, he was a vocalist. Maybe a vocalist on stage? He was born in Ohio, and his parents were Abner White and Josephine Colburn. So are Charles M. White and Gus Milton the same person? Or was Josephine actually married 3 times? When I went over to Family Search, I found a different version of Charles and Fanny's marriage record, and it names him as Charles Milton White. But there's no image, so I really can't judge the accuracy. But wow, was that intriguing. Then I found the death certificate for Charles Milton White, naming his parents as Abner White and Josephine Colburn. Exactly the same as the marriage record. The pieces fit. Fanny's first husband was Frank Cotting, and her second husband was Charles Milton White. Charles used Gus Milton as a stage name, and Fanny started going by Josephine, borrowing her new mother-in-law's first name. So we have a family full of fake names and a public persona that doesn't match their real relationships. But Lola's story isn't complete. What happened to Fanchon, Lola's daughter who was mentioned in the obituary in 1918? Well, in 1920, Fanchon was living with Josephine in Denver, Colorado. There was a battle over custody and child support, with Fanchon caught between her father and her grandmother. Bert, whose full name was Lloyd Bertram Pfeiffer, took Josephine to court, saying that he no longer cared to support the baby girl if he could not have her with him. When I read that, my jaw literally dropped. I'm like, really? Wow. Well, the judge in Denver asked 7-year-old Fanchon to recite the prayer, "Now I lay me down to sleep." And when she did, the judge determined that Josephine wasn't neglecting the child's religious training, and that Fanchon should stay with Josephine. Fanchon died in Colorado in 1983. There are so many stories hiding in the records, but one name and one lie, sometimes that's all it takes to vanish from history. But sometimes, if you dig deep enough, you can bring someone back. Check out this video to see how I uncovered the identity of a Civil War soldier, a story that started with just a simple tombstone.